Uh, Now it's my pleasure to actually introduce you to Adrianne Haslet-Davis. Adrianne is going to give us a patient perspective, and she has a very wonderful and personal story to tell us. So, Adrianne, please.
Thank you very much. Okay. All right. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for coming today and hearing a little bit about mobility saves. And what I think, and I was invited here to tell a little bit about my story being a patient and having a sudden traumatic amputation. As some of you may know or may not know, I lost my leg at the 2013 Boston Marathon, where my husband, United States Air Force Major, who had just returned from a tour in Afghanistan, and I were out on a date on a sunny day in Boston and holding hands, and a blast went off. And I covered my ears, and just as soon as I covered my ears and I said, the next one's gonna hit, we were on the ground, resulting in the sudden amputation of my left leg. A waterfall of blood replaced where my left foot used to be. Being a full-time ballroom dancer, you can imagine how incredibly horrific that was. You can imagine how incredibly traumatic that was. My husband was covered in shrapnel. For the first 5 to 10 seconds, I had no idea if he was alive or dead. And while all of that is incredibly, incredibly traumatic, what's even more traumatic were the days following. I lay there in my hospital bed, no longer the bronzed, bedazzled ballroom dancer that I was full-time, dancing 10 hours a day and competing on the weekends. I was cut up, shred up, stitched back together, stapled back together, no plastics at all saw me at all. I had lost 4 inches of burnt hair and was feeling pretty rotten about myself. The biggest accomplishment I could make from the day was making it from my bed to the wheelchair, to the toilet, to the wheelchair, back to the bed. And for being third in the world in ballroom at the time of the marathon, that title was no longer in existence for me. My life had changed. And I knew in that moment that nothing would ever be the same. My husband had lived, I had lived, but nothing would ever be the same. Looking down at my leg, I thought my life would result in me sitting in front of the television eating Cheetos, which for a ballroom dancer is not exactly in your diet, eating Cheetos for the rest of my life. I knew nothing about prosthetics. I had never known anyone who was an amputee. I'd never crossed paths with anyone who was an amputee, and I'd never known even the word prosthetic. I'd never known or probably could pronounce the word prosthetist, which I really took a mouthful for like months. And I didn't know what these peer visitors were coming in and telling me, gosh, you're going to have one of these legs and it's going to be great and it's going to be the best thing for you. And I was scared, I was terrified, and I thought there was no future ahead. I am one of the lucky ones. I eventually did get a prosthetic. I eventually did, 4 days later, tell Anderson Cooper, while highly, highly medicated, that I would run a marathon and dance again, even though I did mean it. I was highly medicated. And I stuck true to that and stuck true to my doctors and who I refer to as my Superman, and people that thought that they could prove me wrong and tell me that I would never dance again. And I was stubborn, as I always have been, and I decided to keep fighting. I kept fighting because I knew I had a prosthetic, that I finally learned what that word meant, on the other end, though there are many that don't. I remember the road to recovery. I remember seeing my prosthetic for the first time and being a ballroom dancer, being so proud of my legs that I'd worked so hard to develop. I could stand on my tiptoes at the time of the marathon for 2 hours without needing to put my ankles or my heels on the ground. It was a personal record, one that I will always cherish and determined to do on my right leg someday again. And I remember looking at my prosthetic and I remember thinking, that doesn't look anything like a leg. This is what I'm left with now. And I remember falling into such a deep depression and looking at it and thinking, I can't quite walk in it yet. I can't quite do anything with it yet. I can't dance in it. And in my trying to always be optimistic yet being very, very sad mind, thought, I'm just going to put this guy on. I'm going to slap it on my leg and I'm going to go for it. I'm going to head to the studio and get right back to work the next day. It's just totally going to happen. It's just exactly what's going to happen. It's what's going to happen. I'm going to do it. And I put it on and it hurt like crazy. And I was bawling my eyes out that it hurt so badly just to put it on. Not because it was an ill fit, but because my leg was really angry about being blown off. And I remember the long road ahead of physical therapy, of bearing weight. It took me months to bear weight on my leg. I remember thinking about all of the things that could possibly go wrong. And when I remember finally being able to bear weight on it and thinking, maybe I'll walk again. Maybe this could actually happen. And then I remember being able to bear weight on it long enough to get up to a 0.2 on the treadmill. 0.2 on the treadmill, like it was my first time on the treadmill, by the way. And I was like, I could quick step for 12 hours a day, but I can't even get on a treadmill. So frustrating. And I remember thinking, this is such a long road, yet I never ever lost track, especially being in the public eye, of so many people reaching out and saying, you're so lucky that you have a leg. You're so lucky that you can afford a leg, thanks to the One Fund, thanks to insurance. I remember hearing from parents, I remember hearing from people, I remember hearing from everyone saying, well, what about me? And that always stuck with me. And I would spend hours in my hospital room and in my rehabilitation room at night crying, reading stories from people that just sat in bed all day and did not have legs. And that's why I'm here today, is because I would never turn down an opportunity to talk about how the importance is of prosthetics and prosthetic care. I've had the opportunity to sit bedside with new traumatic limb loss patients at local Boston hospitals and talk with them. I've had patients, parents, fly them all the way from as far away as from Alaska to talk with me about what it means to be an amputee dancer. And they just made the trek and they made the trip and they said, you know, well, let's talk, let's dance, let's try and do this. And that's all wonderful, but I never lost thought of what it would be like to not have a leg, to just sit there. And there were so many times where I didn't have a leg. There were moments where I couldn't put my leg on yet, and I would have to crawl. And then I would crawl into the kitchen to get a glass of water. And I realized I couldn't reach the water glasses. And my husband is at work. And so I would just drink from the faucet and try and balance myself up onto the faucet and put my mouth underneath the faucet. I remember trying to get in and out of a shower that I wouldn't think twice about and bawling my eyes out, looking down and trying so hard not to fall on all of the wet surfaces that surrounded me. And I never lost sight of those people that have to do that every single day. Prosthetics are incredibly valuable at any age, at every age, whether you are a newborn, whether you are elderly, whether you are a dancer, whether you are planning to walk from the grocery store to home. They are incredibly important. And as the Mobility Saves logo indicates, prosthetics and orthotics save lives. And I am not just talking about saving lives by being able to walk. I'm talking about saving lives by bringing yourself out of such a deep, dark depression that you think you can never get out of. But perhaps what's just as deep and just as emotional as that depression is the feeling of coming out of it. The feeling of dancing again, the feeling of moving again, the feeling of being able to navigate, what was it, 119 feet of snow in Boston? We lost count. I don't know what it was. We broke the record. That's what counts. The being able to walk along the grocery store and run errands without thinking about, where are my feet going? Where am I stepping? Cost pressures in healthcare are enormous. All of us in this room know that. They are enormous. I am lucky that I'm married to a man in the Air Force who has incredible TRICARE coverage, and yet we still pay out of pocket and still pay in the tens of thousands for prosthetics. Quality care are expensive due to Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Prosthetists and orthotists need a fair, level playing field. The recent Costello-Duckworth signed letter is about fairness. It's reversing the tides where overly aggressive action by Medicare, largely by its contractors, has been putting hundreds and hundreds of orthotic and prosthetic offices out of business. And if there's anything that I've learned from my experience and my struggle to return to the dance floor and my struggle to return to my new normal, which I am learning to embrace with beauty and acceptance, is that something can change your life in a matter of 3.5 seconds, and something can change in healthcare in a matter of 3.5 seconds, and we have the power to make that happen. But it's up to us to make that power happen and to make every single second count after, because believe me, they do. Thank you very much for your time.